Your mindset shapes your reality in ways that most people underestimate. We often think of reality as something external, something fixed, something happening to us. But the truth is that much of what we call reality is filtered through our own perceptions, our beliefs, our expectations, and our habitual ways of interpreting events. Two people can encounter the exact same circumstance, yet one sees disaster while the other sees opportunity. The difference isn't in the situation, it's in the mindset. This is not merely motivational rhetoric. It's a psychological fact. Your brain does not passively record the world, it interprets it. It highlights some details, ignores others, assigns meaning, and then delivers to you a version of reality that feels objective but is deeply subjective. If your mindset is oriented toward limitation, then everything you see will confirm limitation. If your mindset is oriented toward possibility, then possibilities reveal themselves where others see only walls. In that sense, your mindset is not just an attitude, it's the lens that determines the shape of your entire existence. Now think about the implications of this. If you consistently believe that you are incapable, then even before you attempt anything, you have already sabotaged yourself. Your body might be strong, your potential vast, but the mind quietly whispers, "What's the point?" You'll fail anyway, and so you don't give your best effort, you hold back. You collapse at the first sign of resistance. That failure then reinforces the original belief, creating a vicious cycle. On the other hand, if your mindset is oriented toward growth, then every failure is interpreted as feedback, as information, as a step forward rather than backward. The same event, failure, either traps you or liberates you, depending entirely on the mindset you bring to it. Philosophically, this leads to a profound conclusion. You are not just living in the world, you are living in the world created by your interpretation of it. And this is why some people, when struck by tragedy, find in it the seeds of transformation, while others collapse into bitterness. The difference is not luck, it's not even intelligence, it's mindset. And that should frighten you a little, because it means you can't hide behind circumstances forever. But it should also inspire you, because it means you have more power than you realize. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine life as a battlefield. Your mindset is the weapon you carry. If you approach with a broken sword, you're defeated before the fight begins. If you carry a weapon sharpened by resilience, perspective, and focus, then even when you're outnumbered, you have a chance. Too many people blame the battlefield, the economy, their parents, their past, their circumstances, without realizing that their true weakness lies in the dullness of the weapon they carry. Sharpen the mindset, and the battlefield itself begins to look different. But sharpening that mindset requires honesty. You must confront the fact that your current interpretation of reality might be flawed, skewed by fear, laziness, or resentment. That is uncomfortable because it means admitting that your suffering is not only caused by external events, but also by the way you are framing those events. Yet, it is precisely this discomfort that offers the possibility of change. If you accept that your mindset is shaping your reality, then you can no longer live passively. You must take responsibility for the lens through which you see the world. Psychologically, the power of mindset is also evident in how your beliefs influence your physiology. Studies show that expectation affects performance. Athletes who believe they can endure pain endure longer. Patients who believe in the effectiveness of treatment often heal faster, even when given a placebo. Belief doesn't change the external world directly, but it changes how you engage with it, which in turn alters outcomes. So when you cultivate a mindset of strength, resilience, and growth, you are not lying to yourself. You are programming your brain and body to respond in alignment with that perspective. And here's the deeper philosophical truth. Life will confront you with suffering. That is not optional. Pain, loss, failure, these are built into the human condition. What is optional is the interpretation you attach to them. With the wrong mindset, suffering becomes meaningless chaos and unbearable weight. With the right mindset, suffering becomes the raw material out of which meaning is constructed. You cannot eliminate difficulty, but you can transform it. And that transformation begins not with changing the world, but with changing your mind. Consider this: every great figure who has endured hardship and still risen above it has done so not because life was kind, but because they cultivated a mindset that refused to be broken. They didn't wait for circumstances to improve before adjusting their perspective. They adjusted their perspective first, and that adjustment allowed them to influence their circumstances. That is the essence of agency, the essence of freedom, the realization that while you cannot always control what happens to you, you can control how you orient yourself toward it. So when I say that your mindset shapes your reality, I am not suggesting that you can magically think your way into a perfect life. I am suggesting something more difficult and more powerful, that you have to take responsibility for the meaning you assign to the events in your life. And that responsibility is heavy. It means no longer blaming the world for everything you lack, but it also means reclaiming the power to transform your reality from within. At the heart of psychology lies a striking observation. The difference between people who stagnate and those who grow is rarely about talent or intelligence. It's about mindset. Specifically, whether they live with what psychologists call a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. This isn't just an abstract theory. It's a lens that determines how you approach every difficulty, every opportunity, and every failure. And the truth is, it's a choice you make daily, whether you're aware of it or not. The fixed mindset is built on the belief that your abilities, intelligence, and personality are largely predetermined. People who carry this mindset view their traits as static, like features carved in stone. If you believe this, then challenges become threatening because they risk exposing your inadequacy. Why try something difficult if failure would reveal you're not as smart, not as capable, not as talented as you hoped? Failure in this frame is not feedback, it's identity. So the natural tendency is to avoid risk, to retreat into what feels safe, to stay in the small circle of what you already know. But the cost is stagnation. You never stretch, and if you never stretch, you never grow. The growth mindset, on the other hand, is built on the belief that your abilities are not fixed traits, but evolving capacities. Intelligence, skill, character, they can be cultivated with effort, persistence, and the right strategies. In this frame, challenges are not threats, they are opportunities. Failure is not proof of inadequacy, it's information about what needs to improve. Effort is not a sign of weakness, it's the very mechanism of transformation. When you carry this mindset, the world opens up. Every obstacle becomes a chance to expand. Every setback becomes a stepping stone. Now, it's important to realize that no one is purely fixed or purely growth-oriented. You carry both tendencies within you. In some areas, you might be fearless, willing to stretch yourself, eager to learn. In others, you might cling to comfort, avoiding risk, terrified of being exposed. The question is not which mindset you have, it's which mindset you choose in the moments that matter, because it really is a daily choice. Do you choose safety or do you choose growth? And here's the deeper psychological reality. The choice is cumulative. Each time you choose growth, even in a small way, you strengthen that pattern. You build resilience. You normalize the discomfort of trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. Over time, your self-concept shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone limited by what you've been and start seeing yourself as someone defined by what you're becoming. Conversely, every time you choose the fixed mindset, avoiding difficulty, protecting your ego, seeking validation instead of growth, you reinforce fragility. You make yourself weaker, and weakness, when accumulated, becomes despair. Think of a child learning to walk. If that child carried a fixed mindset, they would fall once, conclude, "I'm not a walker," and give up. But of course they don't. They embody growth. They fall, adjust, fall again, and keep going until they master it. The tragedy is that as we grow older, many of us lose that natural resilience. We internalize fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of discomfort. And so we retreat into the fixed mindset without even realizing it. But the child is a reminder growth is possible if you are willing to endure the process. Philosophically, the choice between fixed and growth is really a choice between fear and courage. Fear says, stay small. Don't risk looking foolish, protect your ego. Courage says, risk failure, endure the discomfort. Stretch beyond what you are now. And if you think carefully, you'll see that the fixed mindset is actually the riskier option. Because while it protects you in the moment, it condemns you in the long run. You may avoid embarrassment, but you also avoid transformation. You may avoid failure, but you also avoid fulfillment. And at the end of your life, which regret would you rather carry? The regret of failing or the regret of never trying? Another critical point, the growth mindset doesn't deny limitations. It reinterprets them. Having a growth mindset doesn't mean you believe you can become anything instantly. It means you recognize that wherever you are now, you can improve. It's not naive optimism. It's disciplined faith in the process of incremental development. This is why some of the greatest leaders, athletes, and thinkers are not necessarily the most gifted. They are the most persistent. They simply refuse to lock themselves into the belief that who they were on day one was who they had to remain forever. And this brings us back to the idea of daily choice. Growth doesn't come in dramatic leaps. It comes in small, repeated acts, choosing to read instead of scrolling, choosing to face discomfort instead of running from it, choosing to reflect honestly on your failures instead of rationalizing them. These decisions may seem minor, but they accumulate into identity. You become the person who chooses growth, who stretches, who transforms, and that identity becomes a shield against despair. So the challenge is this. Notice your mindset in the moment. When you encounter difficulty, ask yourself, am I interpreting this through a fixed lens or a growth lens? Am I protecting myself or am I stretching myself? Am I running from the risk of failure or am I leaning into the possibility of transformation? Those questions are not abstract, they are practical. And your answers determine the shape of your life. The architecture of human behavior, you'll notice something crucial. Reaction begins first in thought. Before you speak, before you act, before you move your body toward any goal or away from any challenge, there is a pattern of thought directing that behavior. This means if your thoughts are scattered, impulsive, or undisciplined, your actions will mirror that chaos. But if your thoughts are structured, deliberate, and disciplined, your actions will align with clarity and purpose. And that is why the discipline of thought becomes the foundation for the discipline of action. People often complain about their lack of willpower. They say they can't follow through, can't stay consistent, can't keep commitments. But very few realize that the breakdown doesn't begin in action. It begins in thought. When your thinking is unfocused, when you allow your mind to wander into distraction, when you don't challenge your excuses or question your assumptions, you set yourself up for failure long before you ever take a step. It's not that you lack the capacity to act, it's that your mental process has not been trained to direct you toward effective action. Let's take a simple example. Imagine a student who tells themselves, I'll never understand math. I'm just not good at it. That thought is undisciplined. It's sloppy, unexamined, and destructive. And what happens? Their actions follow. They procrastinate on assignments, avoid study, give half-hearted effort, and ultimately confirm their own negative prophecy. Contrast that with another student who disciplines their thought. This is difficult, but if I break it into steps, if I seek help, If I practice consistently, I can improve. That disciplined thought creates disciplined action. They plan their study, they ask questions, they persist, and eventually they succeed. The gap between the two students is not innate intelligence, it's the quality and discipline of their thinking. Philosophically, this principle runs deep. The Stoics, for example, emphasize that we cannot control external events, but we can control our judgments about them. That controlled discipline of thought is what allows us to act with wisdom instead of impulse. In the same way, modern psychology recognizes the role of cognitive framing. So, if you frame failure as catastrophe, your actions will collapse into avoidance. If you frame failure as feedback, your actions will strengthen into resilience. The difference is not circumstance, it is thought. And here's the challenge. Disciplining your thoughts is not easy. The human mind is like a wild horse, full of energy but prone to running in every direction at once. If you let it run untrained, it will drag you into distraction, self-sabotage, and regret. But if you learn to harness it, to direct it, to discipline it, that same energy becomes power. You stop being a victim of your thoughts and become the master of them. And mastery of thought inevitably translates into mastery of action. This is why practices like journaling, meditation, and deliberate reflection are so powerful. They are not abstract rituals, they are training grounds for the mind. When you force yourself to write down your thoughts clearly, you discipline them. When you learn to observe your mind without judgment in meditation, you discipline it. When you reflect on your day and identify where your thinking misled you, you sharpen it. Each of these acts conditions your mental processes, and that conditioning spills over into your behavior. Think also about habits. Every habit you've built, good or bad, was first formed as a thought. A disciplined mind questions, do I need this? Does this move me closer to my goal? Is this aligned with who I want to become? An undisciplined mind skips those questions and simply reacts. And the difference in life trajectory is staggering. One person disciplines their thought, builds habits of consistency, honesty, and perseverance, and rises. The other allows their thoughts to drift unchecked, builds habits of distraction, avoidance, and self-deception, and falls. Now you might ask, how does this translate to real freedom? When you discipline your thoughts, you create alignment between your values and your actions. You don't simply react, you choose. You don't just drift, you direct. That sense of control, of harmony between what you think and what you do is the essence of personal integrity. And integrity is the ground of freedom. Because when your actions serve your higher goals instead of your lower impulses, you stop being a slave to the chaos of your own mind. The truth is, discipline of thought is not about rigid control, it's about purposeful direction. It's not about suppressing feelings or denying difficulties, it's about interpreting them wisely and responding with clarity. It is choosing to feed the thoughts that strengthen you and starving the ones that weaken you. It is about recognizing that your mind is a garden, and if you do not weed it daily, the weeds of doubt, fear, and distraction will take over. And once the weeds dominate, your actions will follow suit, messy, inconsistent, unfruitful. So the discipline of thought is not optional, it's essential. You cannot expect consistent action if your thinking is erratic. You cannot expect powerful results if your inner dialogue is weak. To act like a disciplined person, you must first think like one. The battlefield is in the mind, and whoever wins that battle determines the shape of your life. Reality is not simply what happens to you, it is also how you interpret what happens. Two people can live through the same event, encounter the same obstacle, or face the same loss, yet walk away with entirely different experiences of it. One sees tragedy, the other sees opportunity. One becomes bitter, the other becomes stronger. The external facts are the same, but the internal lens, the mindset, transfers everything. And that is why we can say, without exaggeration, that mindset shapes your reality. Think of mindset as the filter through which you process life. If that filter is dark, distorted, or narrow, your experience of reality will be equally dark and limiting. If that filter is clear, resilient, and expansive, your experience of reality will open into possibility. The facts don't change, but the meaning does, and meaning is what we ultimately live by. You do not live in reality as it objectively exists. You live in reality as you perceive and interpret it. This truth can be liberating or terrifying, depending on how you receive it. If you believe your mindset is fixed, then you will feel trapped by your current way of seeing the world. But if you accept that your mindset can be trained, reshaped, disciplined, then you realize that much of what you call reality is, in fact, malleable. You may not control the events of your life, but you do control the narrative you tell yourself about those events. That narrative is the bridge between the external and the internal, between what happens and how it defines you. Consider adversity. When life confronts you with loss, failure, or hardship, your mindset dictates whether you are crushed or strengthened. The fixed mindset interprets adversity as a final verdict. This proves I'm inadequate, unlucky, doomed. That interpretation shrinks your reality into despair. But the growth mindset interprets adversity as a challenge to overcome. This hurts, but it will make me wiser, stronger, deeper. And that interpretation expands your reality into growth. The same circumstance, two radically different lives, or take success. The fixed mindset interprets success as fragile, something that proves your worth, but also something you must desperately protect. You become anxious, defensive, constantly afraid of losing what you have. Your reality is defined by fear of decline. But the growth mindset interprets success as evidence of process. I worked hard, I learned, I improved, and I can keep doing so. That interpretation creates confidence, humility, and forward momentum. Again, the same fact, a success, but two entirely different realities. We often underestimate how powerfully mindset shapes not just how we interpret events, but how events themselves unfold. This is because perception influences action, and action influences outcomes. If you approach life with a defeatist mindset, you act timidly, avoid risk, and miss opportunities. And those missed opportunities then confirm your belief that the world is against you. But if you approach life with a mindset of possibility, you act boldly, persist through setbacks, and seize openings. And those victories confirm your belief that growth is possible. Mindset in this way becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't just shape how you see reality, it shapes the reality you actually create. This principle is at the heart of both psychology and philosophy. Cognitive psychology speaks of schemas, mental frameworks that guide perception. If your schema is negative, you filter everything through it and the world looks darker than it is. Existential philosophy reminds us that humans are meaning-making creatures. Reality does not present itself as meaningful. We impose meaning on it, and that meaning, whether hopeful or hopeless, dictates how we live. In both traditions, the message is the same. Your inner world determines the quality of your outer experience. But mindset does more than shape your individual reality. It influences the people around you. A disciplined, resilient mindset radiates strength. Others feel it, trust it, and are elevated by it. An anxious, negative mindset radiates weakness. Others feel it, distrust it, and are pulled down by it. You are not just shaping your own experience, you are shaping the environment you inhabit and the lives you touch. Your mindset creates a ripple effect that either spreads growth or spreads decay. This is why training your mindset is not a luxury, it is a responsibility. If you allow your mind to default to fear, resentment, or victimhood, you are not just limiting yourself, you are contributing to the very chaos and bitterness you despise. But if you discipline your mind toward clarity, courage, and responsibility, You not only transform your own life, you become a source of transformation for others. In this sense, your mindset is not just personal, it is moral. It determines not only how you live, but how you affect the world. And here's the paradox worth reflecting on. Mindset is invisible, but its consequences are visible everywhere. You cannot see someone's mindset directly, but you can see the fruits of it in their habits, their relationships, their resilience, their success, or their collapse. Over time, mindset writes itself into reality. What begins as an internal orientation becomes an external destiny. So the ultimate question is not what is happening to me, but rather how am I interpreting what is happening to me? Because interpretation will shape response, response will shape action, and action will shape reality. Your mind is not just a passive observer of life, it is the author of your experience of life.